Greetings to all my friends, subscribers, and even those who aren't friends. Stepanets is back with you on the air. As always, we show you hidden places and reclaim the history that was once stolen from us. Today, we will be talking about Kurenivka, a district in the capital. We're going to make an introductory video about Kyiv's Kurenivka, not covering everything, but focusing on one of its oldest and most interesting streets, Syretska Street. It's very old, over 200 years old. Unlike many other streets in our city, it has stubbornly so never changed its name. And the name we have is so comprehensive, expansive, and quite comprehensive, concise, and clear. It is connected to the Syrets River, which flows here. We have already talked about the Syrets River and filmed a video about its underground section. If you haven't seen it, you can check it out. Well, today we'll also include a few short clips from our old videos that didn't really take off. But at the time, a lot of effort went into them. The length of the street is about 3.5 kilometers. And today, in what has already become my favorite format, we're walking and filming. I'm simply walking along Syretska Street and commenting on everything around me. I'm telling you about particularly interesting places. So the street begins on the Obolon side, from the direction of Obolonsky, starting at Markovichok Street, and then continues towards Babin Yar along Old Zicha Street. In other words, it starts at Pizmenikov Street and ends at Pizmenik Street. But before we begin our walk through Kurenivka and Syretska Street, get to know all its secrets, fantastic discoveries, and much, much more, I strongly urge you to subscribe to this wonderful channel if you haven't done so already. It is especially important now in these difficult, anxious, and frightening times for Ukraine to cherish our historical memory, to restore what has been taken from us for centuries and what is now being threatened with destruction. So every subscription to our channel is another little brick in the strong foundation of preserving the historical heritage of Kyiv and Ukraine. So subscribe to Stepan Smolodets if you haven't done so already. Tell all your friends about us. Recommend, repost, share, and be sure to comment on what you've seen, add to it. Enrich me and our readers, viewers, with information. After all, I've done my part. Now, I'm waiting for your feedback. You can also support our channel financially with a donation in HRivnia. If you have the opportunity, as long as it doesn't hurt your wallet and you prioritize donating to the armed forces of Ukraine. And now, stay tuned, it's going to be interesting. Watch until the end and enjoy. Tun 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 tun. Syretska Street begins in the industrial zone and then transitions into two functional zones. These are the residential zone and the industrial zone. They are located on both sides of the road, essentially without mixing into a single zone. And now I am already approaching the intersection with Kurenivka Street, right at the very beginning of Syretska. There used to be two enterprises located here, right behind me. A large modernist complex of the former Kyiv Cinema Equipment Plant, also known by its abbreviation KINAP. They like to use abbreviations like that in Soviet times. And on the opposite side, there was also the Voluntary Fire Society enterprise. As my father used to say, fire extinguishers. He used to work here at one time on those fire extinguishers, pumped up. The site of the enterprise, they are more dead than alive now. And today we'll mostly be talking about them in a historical context. What is gone. We come out at the corner of Syretska and Kurenivka. Here was once a famous establishment called Penguin. It's been gone for a long time, but instead the name still lives on in the people's memory in the form of a lake. And in general, this whole intersection is called Penguin. At one time we made a comprehensive video about Penguin with the direct creator of this interesting structure, the son of architect Semen Odnopozov, Ihor Odnopozov, my good friend. He also gave us an extensive interview about this establishment. Here we present it in a shorter form, but we do recommend it. You can watch the full-length video. As for the Kinap factory behind me, which we are passing by right now here, at one time there was a church here where the famous writer Anatoly Kuznetsov was baptized, the author of the most renowned documentary novel about Babin Yar, about the totalitarian German and Soviet regimes. We will mention the name Kuznetsov more than once today. The church was in use for a long time, but after it was closed during the Soviet era, it was used as a club for the cinema equipment factory. Later it was demolished. The church was designed by the architect Kazansky. Well, he seems to have had rather unfortunate luck. Every building he constructed seems to be followed by some kind of bad karma. Even a house. It was first destroyed during his lifetime on Sagaidachnogo Street at what is now Poshtova Square, and then after it was restored, it was demolished again in our time, in 2010, even though the building was in almost perfect condition. Let me remind you that the church was destroyed sometime in the 1980s when a new Kinap building was constructed there, which operated for about 10 years, no more. We cross Karolivska Street, pass by Pingvin, and to my left are the buildings of the Karolivska vitamin factory. The locals remember. The local aromas, they still appear from time to time. Depending on the wind direction, there were distinctive smells. This is a very common phenomenon in many industrial areas of Kyiv. And Soretska Street was one of the first industrial zones in Kyiv. Numerous enterprises were located here. A leather factory, brick factories. One of the first in the history of Kyiv and Ukraine. There were separate breweries. And here, accordingly, whenever a factory was operating, those were the smells you'd get. Sometimes it smelled of dead animals, that was the brewery. Sometimes of Ondivet, that was the vitamin factory. We are crossing another street heading towards Sareka Street, which runs up perpendicular. On one side we have the building of the shoe factory, the fourth one. This is one of the factory was built in Kurenivka at the end of the 1920s and was one of the most powerful in the Soviet Union. She made somewhere up to 10,000 pairs of shoes per day. Accordingly, many people worked there and it was necessary to build housing for them. And right here, according to the design of architect Barzilovich, a building with elements of Ukrainian modernism was constructed in the early 1930s. Here is that very building of yours. The only thing is it was never fully completed. There was supposed to be a corner tower in the left corner. A vivid project has been preserved, published in the magazine Socialist Kyiv. I just made a mistake. It's not the early 1930s, but the late 1930s. The year 1937, precisely. The year of the great Stalinist purge. On the opposite side from the Barzilovich building. There is a former studio, a household one, filled with all sorts of Soviet, semi-Soviet, semi-antique stucco, decor, all kinds of cornucopias and so on. Now there's a music school there, but before that there was a household studio, and even earlier somewhere on this site was located the police. Our police protect us, give us free rides, give us free haircuts. Here we are passing by the tram. Oh, sorry, the Trolleybus depot Kurenivka. One of, I would say, the last of the Mohicans among depots, still operating. Next to it, there is an administrative building, which is apparently half residential, because on the upper floors, you can clearly see various belongings. You can see laundry hanging out to dry. Everything is like that there. This, I believe, is that same famous thing where Kyiv Pastrans invites people to work as trolleybus drivers and public transport conductors. Foreigners are foreigners, Well, foreigners for non-residents are provided with housing. Here you see, over there they have it. Non-residents have received housing, probably. See over there? Everything is drying in the windows. So here, as I understand it, live tough, strict conductors with a tough, strict life. On the even-numbered side from me, the street already begins to be clearly divided into zones. The residential zone is made up of buildings from several generations of Soviet architecture all at once. The 1930s are represented here, as well as the 1940s, 1950s, and 1970s. There are no new buildings. Oh, please note, that's it. On the other side, accordingly, begins the famous Champanka, one of the first breweries in the history of Kyiv, founded back in the mid-19th century by the German colonist Wilhelm Reich. He left behind a great architectural legacy, including two sons, Yakov and Mikhailo. Yakov and Mikhailo continued their father's work. Accordingly, Mikhailo's factory was located on Kirillivska Street, or more precisely, Nizhno-Yurkivska Street. We filmed a big detailed video about it. I climbed everywhere there, crawled in and over everything. And Yakov, Richard, owned a factory on Kirillivska Street. It was actually one of the very first and oldest breweries in the entire former empire. Interestingly, over time it underwent various transformations more than once. In Soviet times, at the end of the 1920s, it was modernized and converted into a canning factory. And yes, it was here, at this canning factory, that little Tolya Kuznetsov worked for literally a day or two, as he recalls in his documentary novel Babi Yar, where they were able to eat as much jam as they wanted. As Tolik said, only a fool could stay hungry at the canning factory. But around opposite this canning factory, well, wine factory or champagne factory, or as Champanka, which is how most Kyivans know it, there is this remarkable structure that has repeatedly attracted people's attention. And I myself have also been asked more than once about its original purpose. A little higher up above it lies the Kurenivka Cemetery, a very old cemetery, several hundred years old. I'll also briefly talk about it. And right next to it, quite unexpectedly, they just started tearing down the slope and building this kind of tower, almost like a fortification. In reality, this is formwork for pouring concrete. Apparently, some kind of housing was supposed to be built here, although its location is very strange. Right next to an old cemetery, basically on top of graves. Here's an opening at the top. And right after that is the Kurenivsky Cemetery. You can get directly inside it, over there. So you know I'm not making this up. See, there are the crosses already. And right next to them is this tower. When they were pouring, the concrete was flowing through these gaps. So it's clear that someone started building something here and didn't finish. So you have the opportunity to comment and share your guesses. It's a pretty tough-looking spot, kind of like those playgrounds in the style of black ghettos in the United States. Well, in general, Kurenivka has always had that proud, rebellious vibe. I'd say the neighborhood is pretty criminal, even gangster-like. Well, we'll definitely make a separate video about Kurenivka and its character. But today, we're focusing on Siretska Street in all its glory. So, this building here, the Wilhelm Richard factory, later Yakov Richards, has been standing here since the mid-19th century. But now, unfortunately, it's up for sale, demolition, or maybe it's already been sold, even though it's an architectural monument. It would be a real shame if they end up destroying it. Please tell us about the champagne wine factory. So, what's going on with it? Is it done for?
Rubbing sound.
And what are they going to do? Include it? Because it's an architectural monument, and we're filming so that it doesn't get included.
That's the right thing to do. Yes, that's good. And now there's no such grapes in Crimea. Everything used to be brought here. Everyone brought it from there. And now what? Well, what?
We could at least buy it somewhere, if there was a will. They'll build you such housing here. High-rise buildings, so crowded you won't be able to squeeze through.
I heard they want to demolish it and build the same kind of houses here, but without the girls.
Exactly.
There's a river down there.
Yeah. The lake is over there. They'll go past it. Yes, and they have a lake on their territory, like there used to be a small one, right at the entrance.
The territories there are collectible. And there's also a river there.
And is that the one by the Penguin, the Green Lake? Is that the quarry one? Or do you mean the Serets River?
I know it's the Serets River. Well, there's a lake there. A big lake. When the kids were little, we used to go there to Hubelitz,
That's what they called his career, right?
the quarry lake.
Yeah, yeah.
We used to go there, the kids, to Hubelitz. The water there was really nice. And then they put up a tree. The kids were a bit older by then.
Excuse me, what is your name? Halina Dmitrievna, thank you very much for your comment. So let's hope they don't build over your place here. Have a great day. And this, as I understand, someone was building a house for themselves?
That's not a house.
Then what is it? Like some kind of hay barn? Well, maybe. This is a Jewish plot, not a cemetery. Oh, so something was being built here before the war?
Well, this was before the war.
I thought it seemed to me that it's been standing like that for about 10 years.
Before the war? No. They started building before the war. Then the war began.
Well, it basically looks like a synagogue. I remember when they started digging up this hill right next to the cemetery. That must have been back in 2016, I think. I think someone wanted to build something for themselves on top of the bones. They started digging, yes.
They threw out the coffins.
Oh, really? Did they build it? That they had to dig it up, right? Well, it was obvious that it was basically cemetery grounds. The gate starts right there.
There were some real landlords living there with their grandmother. There was a little garden, a small one. That's how they were. There was another house over there where it stands now. Their sister lived there. She lived there. There was a river here, an orchard. There were apples and cherries. They tore everything down.
Have you lived here long? Since 1975. Were the smells okay? Did they bother you living here?
Just like the vitamin was before, the vitamin is once again present right here too, just as it was previously, remaining unchanged as always.
And after the Second World War, it was adapted, the Jakob Richard wine factory, into a factory of the Microian concern. The factory was converted into a sparkling wine factory. It was one of the first in the Soviet Union to export to many countries around the world, to various regions. There was even its own lake where fish were bred, so to speak, were raised, and he ordered to live long in 2017. After that, its fate is uncertain. People say they want to demolish it. Oh. As you can see, the locals, and build housing in its place. Apartment buildings, which, of course, would lead to a complete collapse on Soretska Street. It's very narrow, with constant sinkholes, because the Serets River, which flows here in an underground collector, still makes its presence felt and is constantly causing subsidence, collapsing and burying everything around it. I have photos of craters, of the huge arches of the collector. I have the video of another collapse. Here you see Henkel and Grupa, Stolishny, 1954. Unfortunately, everything has breathed its last. Capital. The Stolichny Champagne wine factory, also known as Champanka among the people, also known as KZSHV. And they say that the Soviet authorities, this name for champagne wines, they supposedly used it illegally, contrary to the laws on naming, meaning it's a patented brand and only in Champagne. Are they supposedly allowed to use it? So about 800 meters further, on the factory grounds, there stood a grand building, the House of Culture, or even a palace, I would say. It was also built in the 1950s in that Stalinist empire style, as I like to joke. With those kinds of columns. It was a palace of culture. Concerts were held there. Even in the 70s, all sorts of progressive Kyiv bands played there, doing remakes of popular songs of the time by legendary groups like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, Jimi Hendrix, and so on. Then in the 80s, the Kyiv Music Hall began here. The second one in the Soviet Union. The first one, let me remind you, was located in Petersburg, well, Leningrad, as it was called then. In 1971, a famous bard performed here, Sas, one of the first Soviet superstars of film and music who has deep roots in Kyiv. I wouldn't so easily describe him with a Soviet-Russian label because he is very closely connected to Kyiv. This, of course, is Vladimir Semyonovich Vysotsky. A fragment of his original song has even been preserved. But where does he say what? Where does he sing? Like he performed with, not one person performed with a guitar, not a belly of champagne wines, but a factory. A champagne factory forever with me. Well, something like that. On the opposite side, the administration building is a bit further from the champagne factory as we go up along. Syretska, the yellow office building, is nothing other than the former administration of the Petrovsky brick factories, which was actually responsible for that terrible Kurenivka disaster that happened in 1961, and whose roots, unfortunately, are very closely tied to Syretska Street. And right across the street, you start to see old houses, almost like those in a village. This house is known as the Sportyankova house. As I understand it, that was the surname of the homeowner. There's even an entry, about this house under that name on Wikipedia. The house is obviously wooden and old. It's just been covered with metal sheeting. Like that. That's probably to better preserve the wood, since it's a rather fragile and not very durable material. Let's keep moving. Here we already see addresses. Mom? Syretska 33, and on the opposite side, 68. Behind me, the development is entirely residential. These are houses typical of old Kurenivka. It was along this route. In 1941, or perhaps already in 1942, that little Anatoly Kuznetsov walked with a bag of food to the Syrets concentration camp to bring provisions for Paul Radomsky, the commandant of this terrible place of death. And here, at the service station right behind the private houses, there used to be some kind of sect, a very peculiar one, with all sorts of frightening inscriptions, all kinds of threatening messages and curses directed at various politicians and the authorities of that time. It was a pretty creepy thing. Later on, as I understand it, they were either dispersed or something else happened to them. That's it. And this is one of the old buildings of that factory. The Petrovsky brickworks, which ultimately led to the terrible catastrophe in 1961. Let me remind you that at that time, pulp was being pumped out of Babyn Yar. This is a kind of substance waste from the construction industry. They were pumping it into Babyn Yar in order to completely destroy it. But nature still made itself known, and in 1961, the dam broke. A terrible man-made disaster occurred with a huge number of human casualties. So, the roots of this catastrophe actually go back to quiet. The roots of this catastrophe lead to Syretska Street, because it was here that this pulp was washed in from the local factories. They washed it in until, what do you need?
This?
Yeah, that's fine too, with me. Hooray.
Thank you.
That's all. Thank you for watching. Thank you. A new one is coming soon, in a week.
All right, that's it.
Thank you. Goodbye. So this street is still, even if only indirectly connected to that terrible catastrophe, Amam of 1961. But actually, it all started with Mikkelsen, a Kyiv entrepreneur who bought factories here and extracted bricks here. Later, during Soviet times, it was expropriated. That's right. In fact, industrial activity on Syretska Street began about 300 or 400 years ago, because the Syrets River, in terms of its length and catchment area, is only slightly smaller than the legendary Libid. And because of this, there were, attention, twice as many watermills as there were at one time on the Libid. There is a wonderful map from the mid-19th century that actually shows these mills, the water mills on the Syrets River, even today. The name of the stop, Factory of Wall Building Structures, reminds us of those terrible times of the accident. There you have it. And this entire area, upstream along Syretska Street from the Champansky Kyiv factory, on the left, odd-numbered side, was all occupied by these Petrovsky brick factories. They produced a huge amount of building materials, which was absolutely necessary in the post-war period of reconstruction of the city. This included the rebuilding of Kyiv and the restoration of infrastructure on Sklyarenka Street. Although I don't know whether they've renamed it yet or not. There was a bathhouse, now it's out of service, but it was very close to Syretska. And at the end of Syretska Street, where it curved, there stood the dormitory of the construction plant and a bathhouse, which was built almost back in the Tsarist times. This bathhouse was demolished sometime around 1980, 105, comfortable, paradise. It has been running here unchanged for many, many years. This is the main means of transport from the children's clinic to Syretska Street. The bus is, to this day, the main form of transport here along Syretska. In its mid-rise, its middle, so to speak, stretch. Out of focus. That's it. And here you can see the Wall Materials Factory. This factory hasn't been operating for a long time, but the name of the bus stop remained. And here you can see the remnants of old quarries beneath Cherkenya Hill, where in the mid-19th century, archaeologists discovered a terrifying antediluvian creature, some kind of monster that was called all sorts of names, in all sorts of ways. That's it. And now we're getting closer to the place where the Syrets River is. The further you go upstream, the closer it gets to an open channel. In other words, the river itself, which is 11 kilometers long, is enclosed in a collector for only about 30% of its length. So it's actually much luckier than many other small streams in the city of Kyiv. Back in the day when we were kids, we used to swim in it, just splashing around. I even have a guided tour route that follows the course of the Syrets. I'll have to organize it, so be sure to come to our tours. Be sure to register on the Hidden Kyiv website. If you want the tour to be led by me personally, make sure Aus. It says Stepanets, because we have many guides, and we're also looking for more guides. We're always open to cooperation and new ideas. And today, this river is almost completely open. We walk about 10 kilometers along its course from Nivki to Obolon, and only in the area of Syretska Street does it go underground. Now we're about to reach the place where it emerges to the surface. That's it. And here's an interesting little shop. A typical Soviet-style village store. In fact, just a couple of years ago, it still had old signs on it. A vintage sign from my childhood days that said, Gastronom. I even have a photo of it. Here it is. And then gradually Syretska starts to branch out. Part of it turns left toward the former Syrets camps. In fact, it was originally designed as a street that connected the Syrets camps. In the old days, it was longer and crossed over the railway. But there was a crossing there, and it reached all the way to present-day Nivki, to the Berkovetsky Gardens. But later, part of it was separated into Pivnishna Syretska Street, which was then renamed after the Kyiv writer, Viktor Nekrasov. But for some reason, on many maps, it is still marked as Syretska Street. That is, in some sources it is written that Syretska Street is 3.5 kilometers long. In others, 4. In reality, the data varies. You have to measure it yourself. Plus, it has some offshoots that branch off toward the private sector, the Kurenivka Heights and the Kurenivka Cemetery. So the street has quite a complex configuration. Here, Syretska Street begins to descend steeply. Almost at its very end, there is an office located here. I think somewhere around here, this bathhouse was located in old times. There is a photo of an old house that stood in this spot, right on the bend. And here are some interesting, amusing markings. You see the Syrets River is that way. The Syrets Metro is that way. Paris, 2,300 kilometers. Penguin Cafe, 168. Dorogorichi, 152. Oh, Syretsky High Park. All sorts of cool things are shown here along with directions to them. And here in the very lowest part of Syretska, where it almost ends, is the magical Syretsky High Park, from a place of childhood memories. A local nature landmark. We've already filmed all sorts of videos about it more than once. That's it. And this is the Syrets River, which gave its name to Syretska Street. It's quite a full-flowing little river with relatively clean water. Well, here in the area, it makes a kind of loop and then goes a bit further underground. A collector from the 19th century, here on its bank there were attempts, apparently on Syretska, to set up some kind of cafe or communal space. But that never happened. You see, over there again is a brick factory. These very brick factories are what led to that disaster. Up ahead is the Odzicha Street, formerly Demian Bedny Street. There are even old signs left on some of the houses. There you go. And this is the cafe that was never built on Syrets, on the banks of the Syrets River. This way you can get to the Syrets metro station, and this is how we conduct our tours. I'll be announcing one soon, so don't miss it. There will be a tour along the Shevets from Nivki metro station to Obolon metro station, right along its waters, following the entire course. And in the future, I definitely want to make a full detailed video about the Syrets River, the river of my childhood. So I'm looking forward to your comments, likes, and thumbs up. Thumbs up is my own word. If someone doesn't like it, well, that's a matter of taste, so to speak. And as we know, there's no arguing about taste. The Petrovsky brick factories, formerly nationalized plants of Mikkelson and other Kyiv entrepreneurs, actively extracted clay and marl. And so, on an ordinary morning in 1955, 6 years before the infamous and tragic Kurenivka disaster, a bone from an unknown animal was found in one of the quarries of the Petrovsky brick factories. At first, it was mistakenly identified as a mammoth, but later, researchers and scientists concluded that these were the remains of a Basilosaurus, that is, an ancient Leviathan, a sea monster that is even mentioned in the Bible. It was believed that each of the elements had its own demon. Belial is the god of the earth, the black god. Lucifer is the god of the air. And Leviathan is the god of the sea. That is a terrifying subterranean creature. And here, in the area of Kurenivka, naive on Syretska Street, the remains of this Basilosaurus were discovered, which were later transferred for study to the Paleontological Museum, where they are still kept to this day. So I recommend everyone to see the remains of this Basilosaurus, which were found here on Syretska at our museum on Bohdan Khmelnytsky Street near Teatralna. By the way, I should go myself, since I haven't been there since childhood. When brick production on Syretska stopped, huge quarries were left behind. They were simply called the quarries. Very quickly, these deep pits located right beneath Cherkenya Hill, as it was referred to by the Kyiv researcher and our famous 60-year and dissident Bryachevsky, who, following in the footsteps of Ivan Dzyuba, who once wrote Internationalism or Russification, which became the Bible of the 60s, wrote a continuation of this manifesto called Reunification or Annexation. This referred to Ukraine, whose independence was first taken away all by the Russian Empire and later by the Soviet Union. So Bryachevsky in his research calls this hill, a large promontory hanging over Syretska on its odd-numbered side near the industrial zone. He calls it Cherkenya Hill. This toponym is not used anywhere in local usage. At most, this area is known as Shpolyanka from above, named after the former Kurenivka homeowner, Mr. Shpolyansky. But Cherkenya, somehow he came up with this Cherkenya. So here at the foot of Cherkenya, quarry lakes began to appear one after another and people eagerly swam in them. In fact, Mrs. Halina Dmitrievna, our somewhat accidental spokesperson and commentator for this video, also mentions this among other things. Later, some of these quarries were partially filled in with garbage. One of the quarries is very deep, and once a boy from Uzbekistan, the son of migrant workers who worked here in the workshops on Syretska, accidentally drowned there. He went for a walk on the ice, fell through, and ended up there. So the quarries were small, but very deep. I saw it being filled with garbage with my own eyes in 2019-2020. A small quarry on the grounds of the Syretsky champagne factory, the one that is no longer operating, right at the entrance by the main gate. According to legend, this is where the water for the production of champagne was taken from, Uma, which supposedly contained sediment from a nearby cemetery, which once caused a big scandal when they tried to close the champagne factory back then. That's it. And one lake remains, which has the status of a local natural monument. It is called Penguin Lake, or Kurenivka Quarry Lake, or Green Lake, as it is officially recognized in its name. And back then, Kyiv residents gladly swam there up until the mid-1970s. Now there's so much trash there, and it has a direct sewage outlet from the Syrets River collector. So you can just take a look at it, at this kingdom of plastic in which we used to swim, and all of this flows directly into this much suffering little lake, of whose former grandeur only a small fragment remains. And once again, it's time for our traditional segment, The Corner of the Curious. For those who wish to know more, a book about the champagne factory, a commemorative book from 2004, back when everything was still good. The factory was thriving, as they say, and flourishing. And now I can, read you some excerpts. Here there's information about the Mikoyan factory, and in particular about the Richert factory, as well as the canning factory. The order for its establishment was put into effect, and there are a large number of various documents. By the way, next to the House of Culture, there used to be a football field where enthusiasts from Syretska Street also played. There are many different photographic materials in this book, and it can be purchased. I saw it being sold at auctions on the internet. Of course, it was produced in a limited edition for the factory's employees and was distributed for free. As for me, I bought it somewhere at Pochena once for about 20 or 30 hryvnias, I think. Well, prices like that don't exist anymore. The free ride ended a long time ago. There are many eager collectors now, and that's probably a good thing. Look, instead of just talking, it's probably better if I show you things visually. Here, these are copies of Richard's building plans. See, this is Richard's forge. Here, this is a copy from the plan, showing the location of Richard's estate on Syretska Street. Among other things, there were residential buildings there. And so, Mrs. Marina Milevska, a native of Kyiv, had a relative in the 1920s who lived in one of Richard's houses on Syretska Street and was repressed. There are historical documents about this preserved in her archive, and with her permission, I am publishing them here. Here you can see the design for the facade of a one-story house on the estate of Yakiv Richard. Well, the canning factory, accordingly, the history of the canning factory. You see the Kayan Canning Factory, an election campaign brigade. Here it is, the Mikoyan Canning Factory. Mikoyan realized that it was from here, Syretska Street 19, fishing on the lake. This is that very same lake of ours which is located on the territory of the champagne factory. Let's hope that with the help of concerned people, if there's any petition, those who are involved in preserving our heritage write to us, we'll spread the word. Maybe at least the oldest buildings will be preserved because they truly have value. Look, these students pay attention to these huge barrels. By the way, according to the stories of Vitaly Andreyovich Bakhanov, once, the year after the Kurenivka disaster, there was also a very strong flood on Syretska Street, and the cellars of the champagne factory were flooded, and the finished products flowed down the street. Some say it was in bottles, others say in barrels. Well, and then people's imagination turned it into rivers of champagne literally flowing down the street. People would collect it there, scooping it up with buckets and so on. That's it. But, among other things, people recall that indeed, many houses on Syretska Street were destroyed and had to be rebuilt. Here you can see the construction of a residential building for the champagne factory, Syretska Street. A view of the factory from Syretska Street. What photo did we have here? A view of the factory lake. Here it is. They're showing it from every angle here. Construction of a residential building, view of the factory. These residential buildings have been preserved, but at the champagne factory, workers, a workshop here, garages, transformer stations, a group of employees at a ceremonial demonstration, a group of mechanics at a meeting. Well, in short, there's a lot here. Here in the distance, you can see the construction of the closed collector of the Syrets River. Unfortunately, to my great regret, it will probably be demolished after all. The factory itself is not operating, you see, tasting pictures. There was a branded store. Here, people used to come to buy the products. Although I'm not really a fan of alcohol, I don't like champagne. But I'm in favor of traditions, in favor of old enterprises continuing to exist and develop and being a source of our pride. But unfortunately, reality is sometimes different. You see, the builders did confirm it after all. Our lady here commented on the local events. It really did concern the Kurenivka cemetery because there is a large Jewish section there with ohels. That is, the mausoleums of the famous dynasty of Chernobyl tzaddiks. Most people know, well, of course, among Christians and those who aren't really familiar with the topic, only about Rabbi Nachman, the tzaddik of Uman. But among Jews, considering that for a long time they were forced to live in small towns due to the prohibition on residence, the so-called Pale of Settlement, in these small towns, religious leaders, and as a result, many Jewish surnames contain elements of old Ukrainian cities and towns. And so in particular, in Chernobyl, this ancient Jewish Ukrainian city where the population was 50-50 before the Chernobyl disaster, there about 5,000 Jews lived out of a total population of 10,000. This was even before the Holocaust, that is before 1941, during the time of the Tsar. And so the Chernobyl tzaddik also had and still has a very large number of followers, and several of them still come even today. A tomb has been erected on his grave there, which is called an ohel. Right next to this ohel of the Chernobyl tzaddik is the grave of the real brother of the famous Jewish writer Sholem Aleichem. Also, somewhere in this cemetery, the grandfather of Anatoly Kuznetsov is buried. Do you remember him? The one who was always grumbling and then met the Germans. He became disillusioned with them. There you have it. Later, as far as I know, the father of the Ukrainian director Alexander Dovzhenko was also buried there. Well, in general, this is a place that deserves a separate, detailed video about this cemetery. Of course, with your support and your blessing, you know what to do. Hit the like button, leave comments, and send in donations. All right, that's it. I'm just joking. Well, anyway, you get what I'm talking about. That's it. So this cemetery is quite old, located on the slopes between the Syrets stream and Mount Liplinivka. Mount Lipinka. Yes, Liplinivka is an area in Kurenivka. I got confused. Mount Lipinka. The cemetery is interesting, kind of neglected, and many graves there have been relocated from the destroyed Lukyanivsky cemetery. There are also symbolic graves, memorials for those executed at Babin Yar. There are Christian burials as well, but the majority are Jewish. Although the Kurenivka cemetery was originally Orthodox Christian, it eventually became in effect a Jewish cemetery. In the archives of the Champagne factory, there is an entry from 1971 in the guest book featuring Vladimir Vysotsky. I performed alone, well, not quite alone, with a guitar. At the Champagne factory, I am your devoted admirer forever. That's it. This happened right within these walls. But not so long ago, this building was sold for $800,000 as far as I understood from what was put up for auction. If, of course, those numbers are accurate and no one made a mistake anywhere, a zero didn't get lost or added or slipped into a pocket or a sleeve. You know how it goes. Opacity, shakamaka, hairdresser. These little houses were built back in 1954. So this is a residential building of the Champagne factory. Further on, there are brick buildings, and they're made from some really interesting materials. Really interesting. All right, now we're going to head up as part of our walk through Syretska. Quiet. Quiet, quiet. Guys, who's angry? Here, see, the locals say that at first bus number 22 used to run here, and where the tram depot is now, there were also little houses and beautiful fruit orchards, like across the river. Pear. Plums, cherries, apple trees, and so on and so on and so on. We're filming everything here, recording it all. See, we've even talked to the old timers here, although at first they were a bit hostile towards us. I once borrowed this idea from Kolomoisky. Says we. Well, always. By the way, in psychology books it says that when a representative of a company or organization speaks, they should always say we. And a bit further along, Topilovska, deeper into the development, already past the vitamin factory. I can't help but mention this fact. This was the first Kyiv address in, I think, the 1 to 480 project of buildings, which were very cramped or very narrow, sitting close together. A tiny bathroom with a kitchen, just as small. Olena and I also lived in such a place for a while in Sviatoshin. So, this was also the first Kyiv address of Andrei Kuzmenko, also known as the band Skryabin. Although he wasn't actually Skryabin, he was Kuzma, and Skryabin was a different guy. So in that song, how does it go? P. Spiders. How does it go? Spider webs. Damn, the spider webs of rented apartments. Yeah, the sticky web of rented apartments. Rented apartments and two souls pierced by 100 holes. That was actually about this very Kopilovska street. And almost along Syretska. These are some of the notable personalities who lived in this neighborhood. And a bit further up on Shpolyanka lived Oksana Yakivna Mishko, who was called the mother of Kyiv's 60 Years movement, a leader of the dissidents in a small house in the private sector. Now, the street is named in her honor. So the only well-maintained lake in the area of Syretska Street can be reached only by a narrow path through garages, parking lots, and the TRVP depot. Only the locals know about it. Maybe we should write some kind of guide, because people have asked me. People walk around looking for it. Or maybe on the contrary, it's better if fewer people know about it. I think the locals will curse me. They'll say, well, why are you making this popular? Why are you exposing our secret spots? The lake on the territory of the Champagne factory was even cleaned up at one time, also improved, but there's no access to it. I think if, God forbid, they build some residential complex there, then of course the lake will remain for the residents. It's small, but there are fish there too. And these are the remnants of the former quarry. There's an underground drainage system here. But I remember we used to crawl inside it. The fishermen didn't like that They attacked us. That's it. They threatened us with something. Back then we were young, weak boys. Now, of course, if they tried to threaten us, it would be fatal for them. Look, a bird in the reeds. That's a nature reserve, a reserve. Up there are the banks of the Spolyanka. Now everything is overgrown. It's become almost vertical. Here is the outlet from the Syrets River. Through a pipe clogged with a bunch of bottles and all sorts of trash. And someone has already appropriated the far bank for themselves. You know, splashing around, floundering. Somewhere around here in this area, in 1955, this mud lizard was discovered. Yeah, right here. Somewhere the Syrets River flows in, merges with this lake, and has an emergency outflow. It's all filled with bottles there. But back in the day, people used to swim here. You could swim here, catch fish. The water was clean and clear. In short, things were better before. Now everything's gone. Anyway, I climbed up this tower here. On one side, there's the Trolleybus depot in all its glory. And on the other side, there's the lake. So here I am reporting from the Trolleybus depot. Now they're going to beat me up. Also, Ihor Horodnoposov co-authored a book about Kurenivka with Daria Kononiuk. Here, for example, you can see the dormitory. Buildings on Siretska Street, number 32. These were demolished in 2009. That's the one that stood next to the former bathhouse. Well, basically all the housing here is described step by step. Here you see a residential building of the K series from 1954. This is housing. Here are the buildings of the champagne factory. Architect Shiloh. On Kyrillivska, and here on Siretska, a building from the 1940s, 50s, from 1938. This is a building, a residential building from 1935. In 1938, Barzelovich came along with this kind of tower. Well, friends, there's so little time, or really, and so much needs to be done, filmed, so many suggestions, requests, and orders from you, Tanash. Honestly, it's really hard to find the time. You've probably realized that I'm filming this ending now as a follow-up to what was already done and shot. I hope you found this material interesting, useful, and engaging. Please add your thoughts, comment, and share. Subscribe to Stepan Shemolocha if you haven't done so already. Be sure to comment on what you've seen, add to it, refute it, or criticize it. Anything you like, just don't send me to hell, that's the main thing. If you're able, you can donate to our project to, give a little boost to what we do. A few hryvnias won't hurt and it won't make a dent in your wallet either. And I hope you found it interesting. See you in new episodes next week. Thank you all for watching. Stay healthy and may you have peaceful skies.